change the springs on this caprice. Caprice? You say caprice or capri? I don't know. So I took some measurements back here. You can see there's a quite large air gap between the tire and the fender, and it sits lower in the front than in the back. And I'm thinking that that's because they had so much weight back here with the cage and all the extra battery and all that stuff. They just put heavier springs in the back, and then also for handling, they didn't want them to be too soft. So I measured from the ground and made a mark on a piece of tape. This one's 30.5 inches in the front to this mark is 29 inches, and there's still quite a bit of gap there. I think it could look better. And you can see that it sits higher in the back than it does in the front. So we got this set of springs here. These are from Summit, and there's the part number there. This is an Ibach lowering spring kit for a Pontiac G8, like a 2009. Should go right on here. We'll see how much it lowers this thing. And it's got to improve the ride quality a little bit, because right now the ride quality is not even there. It's like riding on a pogo stick. So getting these off of the car is pretty straightforward. There's a hose and a wire for the ABS here you need to take off of this plate. And there's going to be 2 large bolts here. And then up top, there's going to be one 15/16 bolt here. I'm going to use the impact on all of these. I think that'll give me the best chance to get that off without it spinning. And we should be able to pull that out of there. Quick update. I got these springs out, and of course they're mounted onto the strut, so I'll have to change them out. But on this side, you see this emergency brake hoop. It's got a pad on this side, or a shoe on this side, and a shoe on this side that just expands and grabs a hold of that rotor. And then this piece here acts like a small drum brake. On the other side, completely wiped out, not even a pad left on it. So I found the problem why the emergency brake doesn't work. Got to order that. And then up here on the front, I guess this is pretty common on these Caprice and the G8s. This strut mount bushing is bad. So I've got that part ordered. So I can get these springs off, but can't put the new springs on until the parts show up. These springs I can change out, but I can't put the other side back together until I get a new emergency brake shoe. So that's about par for the course when you're working on an abused car. It's always good to find that stuff now. Anytime I pick up a car that I'm going to be oh, look at that. What are you doing? Man, dirty. That I'm going to be using on a regular basis, that's been abused or old or driven, or, you know, there's just a lot of people that drive their cars and do basic maintenance, and that's fine. It really is. But when stuff stops working and they don't have the money or time to fix it, I just like to try to go through everything. The 3 things that I really try to focus on are electrical, and then of course the engine, transmission area, make sure that's running good. And then the 3rd thing is brakes. I always check the brakes. While I'm in there, I check bearings and tie rod ends and duifiers and turny twisties, and because that seems pretty important. You know, if you can go fast, you gotta make sure you can stop mediocrely fast. So I gotta say, on a scale of 1 to 506 in the difficulty level, this project really isn't that difficult. The only special tools you're going to need is a spring compressor that's made to work on a strut. And that's the one that's got 2 separate pieces that clamp on the outside of the spring on both sides. You can rent that at the OO parts store and then return it for a full refund. It's basically a free rental. That's a little trick for you right there too. All right, we'll wait for those parts to get here, and then we'll get cracking.
For her.
Well, that's one spring off. That's that spring compressor tool. Just be careful with those. You know, the newer ones that are built well usually don't have any trouble, but be careful. There's a lot of tension on there that could potentially hurt somebody, namely yourself. So we'll get the new springs on and everything back together, wait for some parts. We'll see how much this lowers this bad boy. How do I get in there? Get it. Mine. Owie, I hurt myself. Take the spring and put it on the car. Oh, stickers. That'll add 10 horsepower. Stay. What? Did you see that? It was meant to be. Oh, dang it. All right. Which ones are which? Help me. The spring difference. They look about the same height. This one looks like it's got dual rates. You can tell by the way that that happened. Right there. But let's see how much it lowers the car, huh? Lowering spring installed. It was actually a lot easier to get that spring in there, which leads me to believe, I mean, there's a bigger gap here, so maybe it's lower. Hope so. Anyway, I'm just going to use this little twisty turny bottle jack to get everything up and lined up, and then of course make sure you use a little blue Loctite on every bolt. I mean, suspension, brake stuff, why not? Might want to make sure it stays there. We're getting ready to put these front struts back together with the new lowering springs on them. And a couple of things I wanted to mention real quick. When you take these apart, make sure you remember the orientation where the top lined up with the strut body. The spring has a pigtail on the end of it here, and it lines up with this little groove that's set in there. And you want to make sure that that groove is lined up the same way when these go back together. On these front ones, it doesn't matter as much because they're central mounting on the top. But like the back ones, you had 4 bolts that had to line up on the top mount. And if you have that clocked wrong, it's not going to go in right. Another thing I want to bring up when you're doing these fronts, anytime there's a mount or isolator or anything that the strut rides against, it's probably a good idea to replace it. You can check to make sure, or you could check to see if there is any life left in them. And the way that I would do that is when everything's installed and it's sitting on its own weight, you want to check this upper mount right here and make sure that there's no air gap between this and the top of the strut mounting tower. If there's a gap in between those, or an excessive gap, that means that this mounting bushing's wore out and it's up inside there too far. These were wore out. These caprices are notorious for being wore out. So I got new mounts. If you're gonna go in there and do it, you might as well do it right. Stay put goo on there. Suspension parts need to stay right. All right, yes, I am putting anti-seize on the wheel studs. That is something that you do. This is something, checking your brakes, changing a tire, getting a flat. Wheel studs are made to go on and off all the time. Sometimes they can gall. Sometimes they can get a little piece of metal in there, over tightened or cross threaded, and that can really ruin your day. Put a little bit of anti-seize on them, save you a lot of headaches if something like that ever happens.
Hubcaps go by like a razor.
The other side too.
You're on.
Perfect.
You have some shocks on this one.
Huh?
At least you have some shocks on this one.
You know what? Nobody asked for your opinion there. Nobody asked you. Blue stuff. Blue goo. All right, what's wrong here now?
Oil pressure sending unit, gauge, covers, gauges, wood screws.
And wood screws,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
A empty box of things.
That is perfect organization.
Okay, but why?
Why ask why? I think it's perfect. The internet will agree with me.
They will not.
They will too. Look at all the garbage. Well, we took it for a test drive. The springs are definitely softer. It rides a lot better. But now, let's check out what it actually did to the car. Before we had 29 inches. And that is 28 1/4. So 3/4 of an inch lower in the front. And 29 1/4. So we gained 1.25 inches lower in the rear. And that made a really big difference with the look of the car. It's still got a little bit of a rake to the front, but it just looks so much better being lower in the back like that. You have to remember, when you put lowering springs on your car, you might not get all of the lowering that you're going to get right off the bat, because those springs have to settle in a little bit. They'll break in, they'll soften up a little bit, and you usually get an extra 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch of lowering out of a set of brand new lowering springs. It's probably going to soften up a little bit more too as I drive it more and get, 1,000 miles or something on these springs. It's already softer than it used to be, which is great. That's exactly what I wanted. It's still rigid enough that when you go around a corner, this thing is planted. It does not lean at all. Those progressive rate springs can ride really soft, and then when you put a load on them in a turn, they hit that second rate and they just really stiffen up and it holds a turn nice. So there you go. Eibach G8 lowering springs on a 2013 Chevy Caprice. Worked great, looks great. I love it.